I forgot I promised to make a review of the Tomb Raider movie. I did watch it a couple weeks ago, so this is kind of my broken up memory of what happened in the movie. So, first off, it somewhat sticks to the story of the 2013 Tomb Raider game. I say somewhat because there is a ship, there is an island, and there's people with guns on that island. And I've got hair in my mouth. But that's about all that's the same. There isn't a part where Laura wanders around looking for crafting material. There is a part where she falls on something and it gets stuck in her belly, but it's later in the movie, while in the game it's very, very close to the start. Speaking of the start, I kind of don't remember what happened at the start of the movie. I think she was working at a restaurant, maybe? I don't remember. I just remember that it's a lot like Uncharted, where it has a pointless start to it that nobody cares about, that has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. But then eventually she finds out that she's inheriting something, maybe? I'm not really sure. Again, I wasn't paying attention. And then she found out her dad went on adventures all the time. So in the game, her dad was dead by the time the game started. But in the movies, he's still alive. Spoiler alert. And she finds out he went to this mysterious island. And even though she's really, really rich, I thought she was, she has to sell stuff at a pawn shop to get money. And the money's never, they don't care about the money later. So it doesn't really, the whole getting the money seems completely pointless. But she ends up in China. And there's an exciting chase scene where somebody steals her bag, but then she chases them and then she gets the bag back. And they corner her after she gets the bag back. And then some drunk guy with a gun on the ship, he fires his gun in the air and then he falls over because he's drunk. And it turns out that's the exact ship she needs to be on to be able to get to the island. And so they talk a bunch, and then he says, "No, I'm not going to the island." And then she says, "Yeah, let's do it." And so they do it. And then they go to the island, and it turns out this guy isn't a very good boatman because he didn't even bother to check the weather because it's very stormy at the island. And the ship just breaks apart, and they jump off into the water. And that's kind of like the start of the game. But she ends up, but oh yeah, that all the characters from the game aren't here. It's just Laura Croft and some dude who was not in the game. Everybody else is gone. There's like four characters, like four named characters in this entire. I say four named characters. There's only the only person I remember the name of is Laura Croft. I have no idea what anybody else's name is. I know they use names, but I don't know what they are. But there's only like four characters in this movie, and Laura Croft is like the only one who does anything. Like the other ones do stuff, but it doesn't matter. So anyway, they get to the island. Just like the game, somebody hits her in the head, but she doesn't wake up in a cave upside down. She wakes up in a camp with with the main bad guy who talks about stuff. I don't remember what he talks about. And it turns out she brought her dad's journal that explains how to get into the tomb that these bad people are looking for. And it seems really weird because Trinity, which is also from the game, they sent these guys to the island to find this missing tomb. But they don't seem like they want to actually find it because they've been on that island for 8 years, and Trinity didn't send them with anybody to actually like dig for the tomb, so they just had to find whoever happened to wash up on shore. So I'm really not sure what the point why Trinity sent anybody there if they weren't going to even bother sending anybody to dig. Like, did they just send people with guns and then just waited until just people started washing ashore? Because I guess that's what happened. But anyway, because of that journal, they're able to find the tomb. And they're able to blast rock away from the tomb. And then something happens, and Laura finds the guy that brought her on the boat. Now he's a prisoner. And then something else happens and she escapes. And she goes over a waterfall, almost goes over a waterfall, but she gets into an old abandoned bomber, just like in the game. And she puts on a parachute and she parachutes away. And then something happens. I'm going to say something happens a lot. And then something happens and one of the bad guys finds her and then she kills him by drowning him in a puddle. And it turns out her dad's still alive. He's been on the island the whole time. And something else happens. And then she gets a bow and arrow. And we know she's able to use a bow and arrow because earlier in the movie, she shot a bow and arrow in a flashback. And that means that she's a master at the bow and arrow now. And so she goes back to the camp and she bows and arrows some guys. And then she helps the boat captain man escape, who turns out he's an expert in guns because he's able to just shoot anybody he wants without even looking. He just has to pull the trigger and they all fall over. And then some more stuff happens. And Laura's dad shows up for no reason. Well, no, not for no reason. It's so he can be captured. So then Laura has a reason to solve the puzzle to get into the tomb. And so they get into the tomb, and then they run into some video game puzzles. And there's like traps that keep people in, according to the dad, because he thinks that there's a supernatural monster or a ghost in there, into the tomb. And they get into a light color puzzle, and they get through that. And then they get to the tomb, and they think there's a supernatural ghost in there. They open it up, and there isn't a supernatural ghost. It's just a skeleton. But it turns out the skeleton has a virus in it. And the people who touch it, they immediately die. Well, first they go crazy, and they start shooting stuff randomly, and then they die. And then a whole bunch of stuff happens, and then it turns out the virus turns people into a zombie. It's just one guy. He turns into a zombie for a couple of seconds, and he gets shots, and he dies, and then the zombie thing is never brought up again. And the dad, he gets bitten by the zombie, and so he's turned into a zombie, and he decides he's going to blow up the tomb so nobody else can get the zombie virus. And the main bad guy, he's trying to run out because he took the finger of the person in the tomb, which seems to be very dangerous because he only put it in like this tiny little plastic bag. Like he didn't even double bag it, so he better hope that doesn't like open up or anything. But anyways, they're running out, and earlier in the movie, I forgot to say this because I forgot about it. That should tell you how memorable this movie is. They had to get across a chasm by putting a ladder over it. And I thought Laura was just going to run really fast across the ladder while old slowpoke bad guy is stuck on the other side and push it over. But no, she jumps onto the ladder and just stands there and stares at him for a while. And then she runs at him to fight him, even though she could have just kept going. There's no reason for her to do that except to have a fight scene. And then during the fight scene, she hits the plastic bag that he had in his pocket and breaks it open, and it gives him the virus. He doesn't die though, so that part was completely pointless. He dies later in an explosion, so he really didn't need the virus. I guess the explosion was just in case he didn't die from the virus. But the ladder falls down into the chasm, and then Laura finds her video game ice pick, and she jumps over the chasm, even though it's like 20 feet across. I guess she's the greatest long jumper in the world. And she gets across and gets out. The dad blows up the whole tomb, which causes the whole thing to collapse. And it causes the main bad guy to die in the explosion, as I said earlier. And then a helicopter comes that they did set up earlier. The main bad guy called in transport, but it was just like one small helicopter. So I guess a lot of people are going to be pissed off when it shows up and they're not going, especially the guys with the guns. But they get into the helicopter, they fly away, movie's over. So this movie was extremely boring. And all the supernatural elements from Tomb Raider were not here. And all the stuff that happened in Tomb Raider wasn't here. That not much happens. This was a very budget-friendly Tomb Raider movie. And there's not much to say about it. It's just a movie that happened. It's stuff happened. Nothing interesting at all happened. There was a lot of talking and wandering around in the forest, which is what happens when you don't have a big budget for a movie. Which makes me wonder how much the budget was. I should have looked it up, but I didn't. Probably wasn't a lot. If you want to see a bad movie, watch Uncharted. If you want to see a boring movie that's also bad, watch Tomb Raider. I guess Uncharted is also boring to me. This was a really boring synopsis and review, wasn't it? I mean, you watched it. It's really your fault. You wasted 11 minutes of your life on this. We're going to blame, not me. You could have stopped this video at any time, but you didn't. It's on you, not me.